But coming back to the INS OIG list, it was reported in the New Jersey Law Journal June 9, 2003, under Attorney General's detention policy hindered anti-terror investigations, mass arrest on spurious charges threw a wrench in the works, OIG concludes. Not only does the article detail that Michael Chertoff and the Justice Department lawyers realized that the wide scope of detecting and detaining suspected terrorists in a policy called Hold Until Cleared was wasting resources and tying up FBI and INS agents' hands, and that a note for the FBI was written by the Justice Department stated that the Bureau should know that the policy isn't getting the job done. It was obvious that the overwhelming majority of those being arrested had no connection to terrorism, the article states. Toward the end of the year, the FBI largely abandoned its investigation of the detainees as agents pursued more promising leads or were reassigned. The special interest process, as the detentions were called, came into a grinding halt by November, according to the INS lawyer who spoke to the OIG. At this time, most of the general public and media were focused on Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, but this New Jersey Law Journal article is a prime example how other news and media sources, amongst our civil liberty advocate spokesmen and organizations, as well as anti-interventionist activists, were in effect sympathetic to the Justice Department and those all detained who they thought were innocent. This type of hostility persisted and was mainly shared towards the Patriot Act taking place. It essentially turned the INS detentions into another crisis, where some politicians took it as an opportunity for publicity by getting involved with some personal cases of detention, showing their own posture of retaliation toward law enforcement authorities and the overall Bush administration. But that doesn't mean there weren't real issues or harsh treatment at the Metro Detention Center, with police officer abuse and profiling either. But in the long run, all this outcry only served to help the Bush administration continue to cover up 9/11, while drawing out early war plans for Iraq, if such an agenda wasn't already planned by the administration when Bush took office 8 months earlier. But the outpouring of concern for those detained only served to distract, as those who may have felt justified countering against the Patriot Act, Homeland Security, TSA, and other government encroachments were still not taking serious and inconsiderate to real threats at what the amount of arrest indicated in implication, that such a high number of detainment was showing a much more wide-scale, insidious grand conspiracy, ultimately meaning that it couldn't have included Saddam and Iraq as conspirators with Saudi state links, nor was it an operation small enough to solely just be under the behest of Osama bin Laden either. And with the Pent Bomb dragnet, there were huge roundups with airport employees, not just within the 3 airports where the 4 official flights departed, but in other areas such as what we've covered in this film, where employees of Middle Eastern background or foreigners were either arrested, lost their jobs, or were deported, likely in some circumstances of nefarious activity having to do with the Pent Bomb investigation. But more commonly publicized in these airport busts were accounts of fraud, lying during employment application screening, as well as not having legal residency in the United States. And there very well may have been some cases between the scale of 700 to 1,200 arrested and detained that could have been innocent in hindsight, but the dragnet result of the amount in arrests wasn't an overreaction or entirely ill-founded on law enforcement's part, considering what was all reported from airports. But there's something to be said if detentions came to a halt by November, which would ultimately mean so did the dragnet investigation. Therefore, considering the Bush administration's continued actions overseas at this time, the 9/11 investigation ended then, therefore is incomplete. Most 9/11 skeptics are those who consider themselves as being part of the 9/11 truth community, have been put on a path to take issue only with the 9/11 Commission report. But the reality is, the 9/11 Commission report is actually the 3rd government investigation. Those from the same camp but more rationale also like to take issue with the declassified 28 pages that were released in 2016, and assert that it's redacted evidence from the Commission report proving Saudi state sponsorship involvement in the September 11th attacks. Although the Commission report did not exonerate Saudi Arabia from complicity, the declassified 28 pages are not a product from the 9/11 commissioners, but are actually a result of a much earlier effort called the Joint Inquiry into Intelligence Committee Activities before and after the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, also known as the Joint House Inquiry or JIS report. It was conducted by the Senate Select Committee and House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, basically being the second government investigation, which began on February 2002 and released in December 2002. Which is why the underlining point we are trying to bring across in this film is an understanding that the first government investigation into 9/11, the FBI's pent bomb dragnet, is literally an unfinished, incomplete investigation, and in retrospect, with that state of uncertainty refined by the mainstream media concealing follow-up reports in an effort to reduce any public hysteria, likely under orders of national security, has still been the official premise or base of all preceding official and public investigations. Basically, from what we've covered in this film that does not examine the World Trade Center or Ground Zero, but is centered around the airports on September 11th and after, should be no surprise that the 9/11 Commission report is chock full of omissions. So looking back tangibly at FBI agents scoured throughout the US and overseas in the pent bomb dragnet, it was as if every field office was entirely occupied in the investigation, as there were 7,000 agents on the investigation, with 4,000 of them being field agents, the rest usually administrative, who all worked tirelessly and continuously long hours and consecutive days and months on end. Of course, the government eventually expanded the FBI into a larger bureau that now employs 30,000 agents, but we all know they're never going to be reassigned to open or re-explore the 9/11 investigation, and it would be useless to demand a new government investigation, as every committee or law firm is just going to revert to the first unfinished investigation, separate from the wishes of truth seekers who only want to focus on the World Trade Center and Ground Zero. In constructive terms of an ideal 9/11 investigation, given if more FBI and police documents were made available on 9/11 hijackers and any of the foreign or those labeled as Muslim suspects detained in the pent bomb dragnet, are there 7,000 concerned citizens willing to volunteer their time, skills, and expertises, even going the lengths of filing Freedom of Information Act requests, sifting through raw data such as arrest reports, puzzling to make a case proving the official 9/11 conspiracy is grossly inaccurate and false? Is there an organization big enough to manage that? And what transpiring goals would those concerned citizens like to see occur or change within foreign policy? Part of the purpose of this film is to give viewers and truth seekers a pair of new lenses to look at 9/11 in a much clearer and bigger view that has exploratory opportunity by understanding what's missing, that is not being addressed by the dominant truth movement organizations and groups. Considering the accusations of Saudi sponsorship, if this was presented in the terms of official 9/11 narrative only to target the audience of those defenders, how receptive would they be? And what would be the normal reaction to the information presented within this film just within the scope of additional hijacking attempts on September 11th and 13th? Is this information valuable to 9/11 victims' families, or those within 9/11 Families United for Justice Against Terrorism that are clients of Motley Rice, the law firm using JASTA, Justice Against Sponsorship of Terrorism Act, to only sue Saudi Arabia and its royal family? What about law firm Cozen O'Connor, who is also suing Saudi Arabia for corporations and estates that lost businesses and other assets due to the 9/11 attacks, which is also being headed by attorney Sean Carter, who has visited and interviewed Zacarias Moussaoui, in which Moussaoui's testimony in recent years, explicitly naming off Saudi officials as 9/11 conspirators, is being used as evidence in Carter's lawsuit. Are Saudi implications all that should be extracted from Moussaoui? Or is there clearly a wider story he could reveal? Particularly in his legal defense for not having been a September 11th conspirator, he has said that he was only supposed to be in a follow-up attack afterwards. And lastly, what about what's left with the 9/11 truth movement and those expectations from activists seeking transparency and an anti-interventionist foreign policy as a result of uncovering fuller criminality and misdeeds within the pent bomb investigation? Clearly, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth won't dare do such an investigation, as they are categorically a limited hangout that will not even confirm the authenticity of hijacked Flights 11 and 175 striking the Twin Towers, which then leaves Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry Incorporated, headed by attorney David R. Meiswinkle, as the only other alternative option that's voluntarily staffed with about a dozen attorneys and so-called experts. Aside their main focus and initiative with Ground Zero, LC for 9/11 say they are open to investigating other states that had involvement, meaning just with where the 4 official planes departed from. But can they handle all the major cities with these additional aborted cases we've covered in this film, as well as exploring the results from the immediate dragnet? Do they even care about being this thorough? Can LC for 9/11 get off the fence with their entertaining denials of Flights 77 and 93 crashing into the Pentagon and Shanksville, Pennsylvania? Can they manage staffing 7,000 volunteers? The answer is likely no. I'm just one guy. I certainly can't do it all. Not even when it comes to explaining this on film, as I don't have the budget or access to a wider variety of television news archives. And I'm not proclaiming to have 9/11 solved, or that I have all the answers, or that I'm an expert. I just know from my experiences having been a 9/11 truth activist to independent researcher and skeptic that these areas regarding September 11th and the following days after need to be explored by concerned citizens and serious truth seekers, and they clearly have not. But please share this film wherever you can and show your support by subscribing to my channels, and please also consider becoming one of my Patreons. I'm Nelson, aka DJ Thermal Detonator. Thank you for your time.
My God. We're
Ladies and gentlemen, I must insist that you return to your seats and fasten your seatbelt, please. Thank you. Those of you in the left side of the aircraft can see the sight quite well. I'm sorry to you folks on the right, but you must take your seats and fasten your seatbelts.
Gee, it's terrible.